Listen up, CELab. I've got some great news for you. Until now, executives have been scrambling to find effective ways to retain customers and increase product engagement. But the solution is actually to train customers right from the start before any of those problems even arise. But without the proper tools, it's easier said than done. Any thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, Adam, let me tell you about NorthPass, the game changer in digital customer education. Say goodbye to time-consuming and hard-to-track one-on-one trainings, endless emailing of PDFs, and help center links. NorthPass transforms your customer training into modern digital experiences. The best part, your learning program can be embedded seamlessly into your platform.
Well, that sounds great, but don't take our word for it. Take the word of industry leaders like Walmart, Pipedrive, Glassdoor, and Freshworks. They all choose NorthPass for customer training. So, hey, why don't you get started today? Go visit northpass.com and tell them that Adam and Dave sent you. Welcome to CELab, the Customer Education Lab, where we take customer education myths and misconceptions and give them a gentle wave goodbye as we send them off to their new homes. I'm Adam Evermescu, and I am joined today by Brian Oblinger. Brian, say hi.
Hello, hello.
Great to have you on the show. And just, I guess, by way of introduction, there are many ways that I could introduce you, but first and foremost, like, I think of you as one of the top voices in the community world. Like, when I think about like who does community right, who has done it, and who can tell me how to do it, like, you are one of the first people that I think of. So I'm really honored to have you on the show, Brian.
I appreciate that. I think a lot of that is just a function of me being old and having done this for a really long time. And I always tell people, I pioneered these mistakes so that you don't have to. And so just trying to help people not do what I did back in the day that's really the primary mission here.
But I think that's like the humblest and most practical way to do it. It's like similar to, I don't know if you ever saw those old Nostalgia Critic videos on YouTube. He said, I watch it so you don't have to.
Yeah,
That's the role we can all play, like in trying to advise anyone. But like maybe more practically. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you've been in community for what, 25 years, is it?
Yeah, since the like mid to late like depending on how you measure it or whatever, like pretty much since 1996, 97, something like that.
Okay, that's incredible. And I want to talk about that, although I know you've talked about that quite a bit on, and this is where we also introduce that you are the co-host of the In Before the Lock podcast, which has been like one of the ways that I've been trying to up-level my own game, because community, I'm responsible for community as well at Personio. And I wanted to get smarter at it. So like one of the things that I've been doing, in addition to reading books and trying to like gain as much knowledge, talk to people who are doing it, is I've been listening to a ton. I think I've listened probably to every episode of the In Before the Lock podcast now. So you've been in my ears.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
I feel the same way if everyone says they've listened to every episode of CELab, because I think we're at about the same episode count at this point. But like, in a way, like, it's like respect too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope you've also listened to all the after shows, because I think those are some of the best content that are in there. But little known secret of the show.
Sometimes those feel a little bit inside baseball, but I always really like trying to figure out like what the context was for what you and Erica are talking about in the after show. I always think those are funny.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah, cool. So we'll get back into a little bit more about your background and the role that you play. I'm saving a few other elements of your bio for later. But before we get into it, Brian, what's your favorite pasta?
Favorite pasta? I'm gonna say rotini.
Rotini. Okay. And it's interesting. You could answer that in two different ways. You could talk about your favorite preparation of pasta, or you could talk about your favorite pasta shape. I just realized there's like actually two.
I went with shape, man. I'm a visual guy. We're going with shape on this one.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think of my favorite shape. Like, I kind of like this. What are they called? Like radiatore. They look like little radiators. Those are funny.
Yeah. The little radiators. Someone from France, right, or Italy, is watching this right now and being very, very frustrated with us for sure.
For sure, for sure. Also, like I should probably at 5:17 p.m. over here be drinking a cappuccino, and then the Italians will really come after me.
That's right. That's right.
But this is when I wish you a happy National Pasta Day, Brian.
I mean, it's a heck of a day. What could be better than recording on National Pasta Day?
Makes me hungry. I always look because there's always it's always like 7 national days of, and generally like my eye is drawn to the food one.
What if we just ended the show? Would that be a first if we just ended the show right now and we all went and ate pasta? Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us.
Mhm.
It's been great, and
Yeah, if
we're
you
all
want to learn more, we've got the podcast website at
yeah.
customer.education. Thanks, Alan Coda, for our theme music, and we'll see you later.
Use code
Uh,
Rotini at checkout for 15% off.
amazing, amazing. Tell them Brian sent you. Well, let's not end there. I'm gonna redirect us towards some actual content. I think like there are many things we can talk about in the connection between community and customer education, but that's really where I'd love to drive focus today because I think what really inspired me to reach out to you about this is I think the program that you built at Alteryx, especially, is a great example and one that I always point to of where community and customer education are tightly integrated. We're often talking to Joe Miller, who I know you worked with really closely in the customer education communities as well, and I think knowing that you had both of them in your remit, that will give us some really interesting fodder to discuss, like how these two things are better together.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And when you say I built it, you definitely mean Joe built it, him and his band of learning pirates over there. So, yeah, I'm happy to tell you, what I know, but definitely want to make sure Joe Miller gets all the credit in the world for what he built
100%. I don't even remember how I was using you in that sentence, but it's
there.
it's a plural you for sure.
All good.
Cool, cool. So, all right, maybe we can start really, really general. Like, I think one thing that's interesting about both communities and customer education is that we have a lot of similar situations that we run into, right? Like we're trying to drive engagement. We have to localize our content often. We're creating a ton of content. Uh, we're working with partners. We're always trying to figure out what the best analytics and metrics are. But like maybe even ahead of all of that, it comes down to strategy. It's like the most important question that you can answer is what are you trying to do customer education or community for? So I'd love maybe to start with like, what are some of the main things that you're seeing customer education and communities being used for in the businesses that you consult with? And maybe especially like when you're seeing them being used together, like what are they pointed at?
Yeah, I think when you look at either of them or both of them, if you really sort of get to the highest possible level view of that, right? Especially when you start looking at goals, like if those teams have OKRs or KPIs or V2 moms or whatever it is, um, what you quickly realize is that we're trying to accomplish a lot of the same things. And when you look at communities, there's a bunch of different use cases for communities, right? But a lot of them are very similar to the goals of what customer education is trying to do. We're trying to enable people. We're trying to onboard them better to our products. We're trying to make sure they have an affinity for all the products and features we have. We want them to use more of it. We want them to be happier. We want to use education and enablement as a way to reduce support touches or make our customer success managers' lives easier. And so it just always occurs to me when I look at communities in particular, if you just go look at a community and you click around, it's like, what are people doing here? They're learning, right? Like we don't often think of it that way. But if you think, hey, if you go to a community day and you ask a question and I answer it and you said, great, that helped me solve my problem, you learned something that day, right? And so in my mind, community and learning really often have very similar goals, and it makes a lot of sense to align those teams because we're all trying to do the same thing, which is help customers be more successful.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We are often serving very similar goals. And like if you could break it down, like when you say help customers be more successful, what are I guess the most common purposes that you're seeing for communities and customer education in supporting that bigger, let's say, like customer success picture?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the very beginning of the customer journey, right? If we think about kind of a common customer journey map, there's sort of like, people discover us as a company or they discover our product. And then very quickly it transitions into sort of the research phase, right? And people are trying to figure out, does this product do what it says on the tin? Can I get this thing and use it for my purposes? Does it cover my use cases? And a lot of times we actually see that research playing out in both communities and sort of the customer education side, if it's publicly available, for example, where they use it as a way. I kind of call it like it's like Amazon reviews, but for our B2B business, where people are in there trying to read what people are saying about it in community. They're trying to maybe take the introductory courses that we have on the learning side. And so it really starts there. And then it goes throughout the whole journey of like, okay, great, I've identified this product or service is right for me and it's going to do what I needed to do. They go sign a contract or swipe their credit card or whatever that mechanism is to convert them to a paying customer. And then it's all about the onboarding, right? It's like, okay, you're welcome. Now we need to get your account set up and you need to download the product or sign into the SaaS app or whatever it is. And there's a whole set of kind of onboarding things there that include a lot of the things we see in community documentation, sometimes certain discussions, those sorts of things. And then on the education side, obviously it's like, hey, here's the getting started video or the interactive lesson or whatever it might be, all the way through that journey, all the way to the end where they're like, hey, I'm getting certified and I'm an expert in community. And, I'm now using all of that knowledge and expertise I've built to build my own brand. And of course, as a business, it's like, great, they're going to renew, they're happier, all that kind of stuff. So if you look at kind of a classic customer journey across any company's product or service, community and enablement and customer education, learning, all these things, kind of you can target each one of those little touch points or moments of truth or whatever you want to call them, and it just becomes this great platform for us to serve customers first and make sure they're taken care of, but then to help us drive specific outcomes in the business. So when people say, what kind of things should we target with community or learning or customer education? The answer is all of them. Now, we may not be able to do it all at the same time, or there's obviously prioritization, certain things we need to focus on first. But in the long scope of time, we should actually be using these things to target every outcome and say, how can we at least contribute, right? It's not a silver bullet. We're not going to solve everybody's problems, but how can we, kind of use it as a way to influence and build better through those outcomes that we're trying to get to as a business.
Yeah, I think that's something again that like community and customer education, like even speaking about them as one thing now, really have in common. You can do everything on an appropriate time horizon, but you can't, or you can do anything. Let's say on an appropriate time horizon, but you can't do like everything now.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, like one thing that I think you plural did well at Alteryx, and you talk about this. So maybe I should back up for a moment to say like the first episode of your podcast that I ever listened to was one called "Make Learning a Team Sport," and so that piqued my attention because you were talking about the connection points between customer education and community, and talking about how communities really enable you to unlock a lot of the power of customer education by making it social, and by allowing people to engage in that learning together. But like one thing that really interested me in that episode, I don't want to recap the whole episode. I want people to go listen to it. I want people to go to what is it, ib4tl dot
.fm.
org dot fm
.fm.
dot
Yeah.
fm, and go download episode 46 and then subscribe to the podcast. But like uh, where one area that you started with there that it really resonated with me, because this is something I've tried to do in every program I've built as well, is like you talked about creating a seamless UX between the community and educational experiences so that it doesn't feel like you're shipping the org chart to the
Right.
customer. So I'm curious, like maybe trying to make that a little bit more practical. We just talked about the fact that community and education together can serve all of these different moments and light bulb moments in the customer journey, but it can feel very overwhelming for the customer if they don't already have like a good mental model of how all this stuff is supposed to work. Like how do you make that clear to the customer, like how these things are really supposed to work together and like where they're supposed to be at any given point?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, philosophically, what else? I'm a big golden rule person, meaning, I always think, would I want this or how would I want it to manifest? Or I never want to put anybody in any kind of situation or, in this case, UI or UX that I would look at and go, ugh, I don't know about that, or I don't understand that. And so when you start thinking that way, it becomes pretty clear that one of the things most companies do today is they ship their org chart, which you mentioned before, and that manifests itself in terms typically of, hey, our community is over here and it's community.company.com, and then our LMS is over here and it's academy or university or learning.company.com. And they often have different UIs or different UXs. Sometimes they even have different sign in, which is even worse, right? And so if you're a customer and you're saying, hey, I have a problem with this software, whatever it is, right? Whatever product you're using. What's the quickest way for me to get that question answered? Where am I going to go? And we sort of force people to go on this adventure of like, okay, well, I'll go search the community and see if there's an answer there. But maybe what I really need is this, at minute 38 of this 2 hour, interactive lesson over here. Maybe that's the exact moment that I need, just like a 5 minutes of that to fix me. Like we sort of force them to go on this safari to like find their answer. And I think what we really want to do is none of what I just described, right? Instead, we want it to be one experience, one place with one login, with one search across all of it, with, everything sort of tied into each other and recommendations. It's like, what would I want? And I know what I want. I want a one-stop shop. I want to go to one place, do one search, find all the things, click, get my answer, and then get out of there, right? And this is why I talk so much about analytics, and people are, oh, like we need to raise our time on site or our average pages per visit or whatever. And it's like, no, you actually want to do the opposite. In a support context anyway, I want people in our community the least amount, because that means that they're coming, they're getting what they need, and they're going to go do their job or whatever it is that they want to do, right? Get back to their lives. And so that's sort of philosophically how I arrive at this idea of like, let's make this one thing. Maybe there is still a community platform and an LMS and, SSO and a unified search and all these things in the background. Technically, I don't want the user or the member to know that as much as possible, right? To them, it should be, oh yeah, you just go to this place and here's all the stuff. And like, I don't really see the seams. I don't really understand that they're different. And so how do we integrate that as much as possible to get to that experience? I'm not going to lie, it's hard work, right? It's easy for me to come on a podcast and tell all your listeners, hey, make it one experience and put all these things together. The reason people don't, if it were that easy, everybody would do it. The reason people don't is because it's hard, right? But I think if we do that work and we commit ourselves to building that, what you see in the end, and it bears out in all the surveys and everything, every time you talk to a customer, they're just happier, right? Like, I get what I want. It's easy. I'm done. I'm in. I'm out. And then again, that gets us to our business outcomes. If they're finding what they need, they're happier, they know the product better because of all of this, then we're going to make some money, right? We're going to sell some products. We're going to get people to renew. We're going to get all of those business outcomes we're looking for. But it starts with kind of getting past ourselves and thinking about what does that experience need to be.
CELab is proudly sponsored by Thought Industries. They've got a super robust tech platform to run your customer ed program, and they've built a think tank and community. Just look, they've released the Customer Education Playbook, a definitive book on customer ed for practitioners. They've released frameworks like maturity models, assessments, and toolkits, and they've got great community events like the Cognition Conference, roundtables, and discussion forums. But of course, there's also the tech-forward platform. Thought Industries has developed a headless solution to allow for heavy customization and has a multi-tenant architecture infrastructure built to scale custom learning portals to your client base to deliver personalized learning for different roles and groups. Check out Thought Industries as you grow and evolve your program, especially if you're doing things like adding paid subscriptions, using free or freemium learning in your marketing strategy, integrating your learning data into your org's overall data strategy, or learning data to prove ROI. Check them out at thoughtindustries.com and tell them CELab sent you.
I couldn't agree more. And I think maybe to make that practical, even like from the level of, uh, okay, like listeners, yeah, you can't have SSO and complete integration between the platforms tomorrow. But the moment you start your program, the moment you start making those investments to begin with, those are things that should be in your vision deck, for instance. They should be on your roadmap. They should be something that, like, already knowing that you won't get it tomorrow, you should already be driving for by telling the story, Brian, that you just told about what that's going to do ultimately for the user experience and what the risks are of persisting too long without that. Because probably the people you're talking to in your business, whatever executive you're pitching this to, isn't able to see around those corners, or like hasn't done that before, so like isn't going to know that that's something that we have to go push, for instance, with the business systems team or the engineering team or whoever it is that's actually going to like make that happen for us.
Yeah, let's give people the most practical step one advice that I can give, right? To your point, like it's not all going to happen overnight. So like where do you start? What do you do today even if you don't have if you have an LMS, you have a community platform, you have, all these different things. Step one in my mind is making a global navigation of these things. Right. So even if you don't have the capability to sort of like bring them super tightly together and integrate them and do all this technical stuff, often one of the things that people do have the ability to do is to change what's at the top of each of those pages. And so if you work with your web team or whoever to build a global navigation that's, community and learning and resources and, podcasts, like whatever those different things that you have that are all part of this global kind of customer ecosystem, and put that at the top of each of them so that there's just a unified way for people to navigate between them, even if the URL is changing and the UI is slightly different and whatever. That in and of itself is a major, major difference to the overall customer experience. And then once you've done that, you can work on, okay, how do we bring them closer together and do technical stuff? Everybody can make, some sort of like navigation with drop down menus and whatever. And that's one of the things that I think frustrates customers the most is they go to the LMS and they're like, "Oh, cool, I'm here, whatever. How do I get to community? How do I get to the use case stories? How do I get to whatever?" And that like there's just kind of a rat's nest of all this stuff and they're trying to click around. So just give them like one global navigation across all of these things, and I think that is the starting point for how do we start to bring it all together.
For sure. And we tend to like overestimate the user's level of tolerance for, like, if it's not literally within one click and it's not right there and it's not super intuitive, they're just not going to do it. They're going to leave. So like, I think to your point, Brian, if you don't already have an LMS, if you don't already have a community platform, when you are actually doing your vendor evaluations, like they're making sure that you're getting a platform that supports at least that kind of basic level of styling, and making sure that you can actually go see an example of a customer that they have in production that has that global nav, and you can find out like what the relative level of effort it is to style it that way. Like that again like makes it really practical to know, even if you haven't fully built out the experience, you can build that into your requirements to say like, okay, I need this level of front end customization. I need the ability to support SSO from these sources in these ways, because everyone does SSO a little bit different, et cetera, et cetera. So you're planting the seeds for what can be built, both like short term and long term.
Yeah, and I must admit, now that we've said all this, I have an ulterior motive for telling people to do this global nav thing, and it is this, which is when you start to do this, two things inherently kind of have to happen for you to build that. One is you probably have to go talk to the other teams that own the other platforms to say, "Hey, we're going to build this thing. We're all going to put it at the top of our thing. Are you good with that? What do you want it to say for your stuff?" Right? So it forces collaboration between the teams, which maybe you don't have today. And then the second one is it forces you all as individuals and a collective to think about, if we're going to build a navigation, what words do we use and how do we structure this, and like which order do things go in and which one's priority over the other? Do we want learning to be the leftmost thing, or do we want community to be? And like maybe there'll be arguments about this, but the point is, it's going to force all of you to start thinking about what is that customer experience, and how does it look, and how does it function, and what are all the items. And so those two things, the collaboration and the sort of design thinking, I'll say, start to build this idea that like, oh, we're actually not separate teams or separate people. We're kind of more closely related. And so you sort of do something like that as a way to springboard that into action, so that over the longer course of time, you say, hey, remember when we worked on that navigation and we deployed it and it's great? Hey, how about we do more stuff together? How about we partner on this, right? So you're trying to get those gears in motion by using this type of a project or program, to get people talking. And that's the beginnings of all of it.
For sure. And so that implies that, for instance, and I think this is a pretty common situation, that you've got like a customer education team over here, and they're responsible for like, let's say, like skinny customer education, which would be like, we're going to deliver webinars and we're going to do e-learning courses. And then you've got like community over here, and they're doing like skinny community, which is like, we're running the support forums. And both teams probably have the ability to expand from that. Like there's more that education and community can mean, but eventually those will start to like really overlap with each other. So it's important to already be building some of those bridges and connections and alignment, so that like those programs can actually harmonize, especially as they start getting towards the areas that are less clear cut exactly who should own what. So I'm curious, like, yeah, go ahead. Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I want to add, like just so people understand the scope. It's you mentioned sort of the learning team and the community team. We often have a team from products who is working on docs or tutorials.
Yep.
We have a support
team. Or they might
team,
be in customer success or support as well.
Right.
Yeah.
We have a support team has a portal and cases, and they have their own help.company.com site. We have customer marketing that's doing podcasts and videos and use case stories. Like you can kind of look across the company and say, there's actually like 6 or 7 groups of people that are all doing stuff that if we think about, when we think about customers and what do they need or consume or what do they want to participate in most companies, there's 5 to 8 groups of different people across the company working on that. And so if you think about, hey, can we bring all of that together, in some meaningful way, or at least in navigation, if nothing else, there's a lot of collaboration that's going to have to happen there to make that happen.
For sure. And especially if you're using the customer, again, like putting the customer first here and not shipping the org chart, then like you can make a lot of decisions on, at least from the customer's point of view, how those are all aligned. But equally, I'm curious because, okay, for instance, like in your experience, you have been, check me on this, like you've been a VP of community that's also owned education. You've been on and consulted with teams where you've kind of got like community sitting here, training or education sitting here, help doc sitting here. Like, I guess having seen different models, having experienced different models, I think it's unlikely to expect that all of those things ever live completely in the same org. But like, I guess having seen different levels of either like federation or centralization, like curious what you think about pros and cons of the model. Like who should report to who? How do you design at least like a moderately good org structure to support aligning for the customer?
So I'm going to give you my cop-out answer, and then I'm going to give you maybe a more in-depth answer, right? And I sort of say, I sort of say cop-out in jest a little bit. The way that I think about this is when people say, hey, where should community live? Where should learning live? Like, should advocacy be in marketing or community or both? Or, there's all these questions, right, about like org design. And what I typically say is sort of the base level one, which I jokingly call the cop-out answer, is wherever it's going to have a chance to succeed, right? I actually don't necessarily have a belief that everything has to live in one place together or, that sort of thing. What I recognize is that companies are complex and everyone is a little bit different. And depending on who the leadership is and do they get what we're doing or not, there's so many variables that go into it that I think it's a bit of a disservice if I, answer this question and say, oh, well, everything should live together under customer success, or everything should live together under a chief customer officer, whatever the answer would be, because it's just not that simple in most companies, right? So the answer kind of has to be, whatever structure or whatever reporting or whatever name of the departments or whatever is going to give it the biggest chance to succeed at your particular organization. So that's sort of the kind of broad answer. With that said, I do think that there are very clear points of alignment here, and I have a perspective on this, as you pointed out, that to me, community and learning should exist together somewhere. Now, does that mean learning reports to community or community reports to learning or whatever? Again, I'm not so sure that matters as much as they're somewhat together somewhere under some leader who gets what we're trying to do. And the directive is, hey, we're all working together, right? We're all on the team. We're all trying to accomplish the same goals. And that collaboration back and forth makes us better and will serve the customer better, right? So sometimes people want to give these black and white, well, community should own X. And it's just, I think, there's a bunch of different ways you could do it. I think what's more important is, are we building the best customer experience that we can? And if the answer is no, then we need to go look at the org again and say, okay, like, is there something in the org that we can change to make that happen? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, but we should constantly be asking that question all the time, right? Like, could this be better? What's the next thing? How are we gonna, bring in another team, or is it best served here versus there, or whatever? I think that's the journey, right, that every company should be on, and it matters a lot less about fiefdoms and kingdoms and who has the bigger title and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, couldn't agree more. It pulls it out of the realm of organization politics and reorients it around the customer as much as possible, right? We know this is messier in practice, but like, I I agree, and I think I would underline a couple of things that you said. One being that the nature of how these things are going to be set up is to some extent dependent on how you need to serve your customer, because who is in your audience, what their learning and connection needs are, will inform the shape of your programs. It has to like community and learning and help and all of those need to be like a microcosm of your overall customer experience. But also to your point, thinking about like where there is energy, appetite, sponsorship, budget, like those are very practical considerations as well that you need to keep in mind in thinking about where to put these things. But I like the idea that regardless of what you call the broader org or who reports to whom, that the idea is that they're tied closer together.
And even at the same company, it's going to be different at different times. And we're seeing this play out right now. We've seen it play out over the last, I would say, year or so, where communities, because of the pandemic, a lot of communities were built out of marketing groups because they had extra budget of like, hey, we can't run a conference, so we have all this money. What are we going to do? We're going to try to build that online. We'll build a community, right? So there was a whole cycle of that. And at that time, if you would have asked me, like, who should own this or, that sort of thing, you'd be like, well, they're the ones with the budget and the vision and the ability to execute. So it probably goes over there. What we've seen in the last year is, sort of with the end of like the zero interest rate phenomenon, at least in the United States, is that all these companies realized, hey, in 2023, we're probably not going to grow, or at least not going to grow much. And so we're going to shift our focus to retention, right? So that put customer success teams in the driver's seat. So everybody I'm working with now, all these communities and education and digital hubs and, scaled success and all these terms we have, those are all being run out of success. Where are we going to be next year? Where are we going to be the year after that? I don't know. But what I do know is that if we have this myopic view of it always has to live in customer success and can never live anywhere else, we're not actually being responsive to the nature of companies and the market and, like other factors we can't control. So it'll change over time. And I think we have to be realistic about that.
Yeah, and it helps us remain flexible and curious.
This episode is brought to you by TechSmith.
That's right, TechSmith. You know them from Snagit and Camtasia. Snagit lets you create images, GIFs, and videos to show others exactly what you see. And Camtasia is the famous screen recording and video editing software made easy.
Yeah, I love it, Adam. I have to say my story here is that Camtasia kind of saved my soul. When I was working, trying to build my first program, I discovered Camtasia and other TechSmith products, and I needed something that was relatively inexpensive, easy to use, and powerful. Overnight, I went from doing tedious editing, recording, and just whatever I had available to me alone with little coaching, being able to make really super high quality videos in a short amount of time.
That sounds amazing. And so if you want to create and share images and videos for better training, tutorials, lessons, and everyday communication, you can do that at techsmith.com. That's techsmith.com. Maybe again, centering around what you said a moment ago about community and learning being aligned enough in their strategies. Like, okay, again, not to like completely restate or summarize the podcast that I want everyone to listen to. You gave some really good examples in that podcast, in that episode, about ways the community and learning can really enhance each other. And the one that I'm thinking of specifically was you gave an example of at Alteryx how you essentially created a social learning experience where people were doing weekly challenges,
Yeah.
and that was exposing all these like use cases and like really making the learning tangible and creating like user generated knowledge in the process. I'm curious, like, A, if you want to talk about that more, like, again, I fully expect everyone needs to go listen to that episode, but like, would love to hear more about like how that worked really well for you. But also, if you've seen other really good examples that you want to highlight of like where community and learning are better together, maybe again we could give some like practical inspiration.
Yeah, I think our light bulb moment was that our customers actually knew more than we did about the product in certain ways, or at least like in ways they could communicate. For example, there's always like workarounds and things in every product, right? And maybe as a company, we're not going to be the ones to come out and be like, "Hey, everybody, like here's this workaround because we built this thing that doesn't quite work the way we thought it would. So like hack it this way." But your customers will. And like we just got comfortable with that. And we were like, "Hey, let's put out these challenges and people will just talk about, hey, here's how I did it. Here's what mine looks like. Let me share the file." Now, part of that was enabled by the product itself. It's a very workflow driven product. There's a lot of flexibility in it. And so there was a lot of opportunity for customers to say, "I arrived at the same end result as you did in a different way, or a faster way, or a more efficient way, or in a way that scales better if your data got, the data set was larger," or whatever the case was. And so that was really the goal, was to help them learn with each other every single week through seeing each other's work, right? We just provided a starting point and away they went, and it turned into something amazing where hundreds of people were contributing to it every single week, and they were learning from each other. And we gamified it, of course. So, everybody was getting badges and wanted to be on the leaderboard. And similar to the way we started this with you saying, "I've listened to every single episode of your podcast," like people want to say, "I've done every single weekly challenge," which as of
Mm.
recording here, there's probably 400 or 500 of those or something. And there's people who have done
Cool.
every single one, right? So,
Where's
um,
my badge for listening to every episode of your podcast?
I'm gonna ship you some swag, my friend. But so yeah, it was just an amazing thing. And what's interesting is people say, "Okay, great, like that's a really cool example. Can you give me more?" Kind of as you teed up here. And what's a little frustrating actually for me is I don't have a lot of other good examples to point you to, because I haven't seen this as much as I would like to. I think it's a huge missed opportunity for a lot of companies. I think what you do see is people do it as a short run thing. So we committed to like, "Hey, we're doing this every week forever," right? In perpetuity. And what a lot of people do is they'll do it on a smaller scale, which I think is fine. They'll say like, "Hey, we're going to do this holiday themed challenge, that runs for 2 weeks during, December or whatever." So I think you see it a lot on the smaller scale, and it's a good way to like get your feet wet with it. But I don't see people kind of scaling it up like we did to a like super regular ongoing thing.
Yeah, but what I like about that is, I mean, again, like I'm saying this through the lens of every initiative that you commit to long term is worth experimentation and
Mhm.
understanding, like if it's generating ROI and is strategic. But like it's it's one thing and it's longitudinal. So like a lot of the times, like you might be sitting in the seat of saying, "Oh, I need to figure out how community and learning collaborate with each other. And I need a list of like 19 different things." And it seems like such a big, almost intractable problem. But you've actually defined one really visible, really meaningful connection point that almost is like generative in the way that it doesn't just create a lot of content, but the longer you run a program, as long as that program is successful in getting traction with your customers, the more it reinforces itself. So that's like, I think there's a lot of wisdom in doing one thing, verifying that that one thing works well, and keeping that one thing going instead of trying to like spend your 100 euros in 99 different places.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think like the other thing that I would call out really quickly is like you mentioned gamification, and you mentioned gamification when you were talking about badges. But what I actually love about what you called out as well is that weekly challenges themselves are a gamified experience. They are game like. And in a way, having the intrinsic motivation of participating in them and solving the challenge, like that is just as much gamification as the badge you receive at the end, right?
Yeah, and there's like we're getting into like inception here, but there's like levels of gamification, right? There's the hey, I want to do it every week. I want to be on the leaderboard. I want to get the badges and all that stuff that's associated with it. But even within that, if you go like look at some of those challenges, one of the interesting things about the Alteryx product is that whenever you run a workflow, it tells you how quickly it ran, right? And some of that's hardware dependent and other factors, but all things being equal, there becomes this other game of like, I'm going to solve this problem and my workflow is going to run a tenth of a second faster than yours. And then I'm going to post that like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, mine was 2/10 faster, whatever. Right. And so
Yeah.
there becomes that sort of game within the game of who can do it faster, better, more efficient, less cores, whatever all these different things are. And so it just kind of took a life of its own. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, like this was all about, how do we serve, kind of taking all the way back to the beginning, right? How do we serve these people in ways that they want to be served and that they're interested in? And again, back to Joe Miller, like I give him all the credit in the world. He kind of envisioned this thing and started it up, and it became a sensation, not just externally for customers, but internally as well. And so we started seeing that new customer facing employees had to like start participating in challenges and learning through that. And then they would also feedback. So they'd do a project with a customer and they would anonymize it, and that would become a weekly challenge like some months later. So there was just this huge loop of how can we feed back into this thing everything we've ever learned and help people learn, but then learn from how they're learning. And it just was kind of
Yeah.
amazing.
That's super cool. And now I think we also have the additional hashtag Joe Miller come on the show challenge.
I think so.
You
I'm
can tell
nominating
your side of
Joe.
the story too.
He's officially nominated. Yes.
Amazing, amazing, Joe. We hope to hear from you soon. I know how to find you. I know where you are on LinkedIn. Cool. So, Brian, knowing that we're getting towards the end of our time here and not wanting to keep you all too long, like I think the other piece of information that we've been holding back, we alluded to the fact that you are a community consultant, but also recently you have published a community strategy academy, which has brought you from the realm of being a community expert and consultant to also now being whether you identify with this term or not, a course creator. So I'm curious, like maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you built the Community Strategy Academy, what's inside, but also like just curious, like what was your experience actually building out all the content for it?
Yeah, it's been a labor of love. I think as we record here today, there's 17 courses, I believe, of varying. Some are 45 minutes, some are 3 hours, whatever. Um, the genesis of it is that I've been thinking about this for years in our little corner of the world. Community builders. There's been various attempts over the last decade or whatever to build different types of learning, different ways of crystallizing this knowledge. Some were good, some were not, some are still around, some are not. And so this kind of summertime, I just felt like we still haven't cracked this thing. And I just thought I'm going to take this on and see if I can give it a go here and build something that I'm really proud of. Again, golden rule, that I'm proud of and that I would want to use and take, but also that provides just an immense amount of value to people that otherwise wouldn't get it, or whatever the case might be. And so, sort of charted a course and charted a course for courses, and built out a couple. and then just kept going and launched it about a month ago in September of this year, 2023. And have a huge roadmap to just build these out. And my overall overarching goal with this thing is I just want to help people get better. I want to help them get better at strategy. I want to help them get better at specific programs. I want to help them get better at understanding the technologies that go into building communities. And so far, it seems like that's working out, and people are liking it. So, yeah, that's kind of the genesis of it, and where we're at today. But I'm not resting. I want to build this out to become, the greatest learning platform for community builders is really the ultimate goal.
I love that aspiration. What was like something that surprised you as you started the actual process of, say, like creating all the content and publishing it and designing it?
You always hear from people who are, creating learning content. And I certainly heard it from the teams, that I oversaw over the years that were doing that, like how hard it is and how much thinking goes into it. And you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, well, just go make the interactive lesson, like let's get this thing out. What are we doing? And then
Yep,
you
yep,
go to
yep.
do it yourself, and you kind of realize like, oh, I see. There's a lot going on here. And, for me personally, the knowledge is not the hard part, right? All this stuff is rattling around in my brain and has been for decades. The real question is, how do I get it out in a way that's structured and sort of not totally linear, but linear enough that people can follow along, and that you're giving them enough, but not too much, but not too little. And like all those things I had to kind of learn. I had to learn how to build learning essentially. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's been the biggest surprise, the biggest challenge, and the thing that I'm still and probably always will be, kind of in pursuit of getting better at. I'm sure if you look at like the first course I ever published to, one that I do in 2 years, it's going to be, a huge gulf, a huge difference, right? As I've learned over time.
Yeah. I don't know if you just heard that. That was like 1,000 instructional designers cheering because they feel heard and validated for the work that
Yeah,
they did.
hey, I'm right there with you. No, I don't profess to be anywhere near the level, of those folks, but I'm proud of what we've built so far, and I think it's only going to get better, over time, and that's the mission.
Well, maybe one last question to you in that spirit of helping everyone get better and up level their strategy before we head to the outro. Like, what what advice would you give to learning professionals if they are just
Ooh.
starting out with community? So either they've been tasked to start a community for the first time, or they're starting to partner with the community team at their company. What's the top tip you've got for them?
Yeah, I think being open to the idea that, like we said before with the challenges, learning can and should be more social, right? I understand the impulse to say, we're going to go build these video lessons or these interactive lessons, or whatever it is, and we're going to publish them and we're done because, we know what we're doing and we're going to do that. I think, though, if you open yourself to the idea of you can do that, and how can we envision different ways for people to collaborate, to learn, to share in learning, to actually contribute to learning. Some of our super users, we enlisted them to help us build net new, learning we didn't have before. So being, I guess, open to being more open about how you build learning and the feedback loops and how you get other people involved, and that it's not all about what we think people want to know. It's more about like helping them help each other and helping them learn and helping them build content and learning that then helps other people. So I think, I guess that all just boils down to collaborate, as much as you can with those teams and see what opportunities there are to get better together, instead of they're over there on their platform and we're over here on ours and we never talk to each other, which is, I think, unfortunately, what happens at a lot of companies. But I'll seal off this piece by just saying I am seeing a pretty significant uptick in these teams coming together and these things being closer together or on the same team. We have a long way to go, but it seems like companies are starting to come around to this idea a little bit more.
For sure. I'm seeing a very similar trend, and it's popping up in a lot of different places. And so if you this is where we turn it into a pitch, but I genuinely believe that, like, if you listener are looking to actually now go on this journey and upskill yourself, you're probably either going to want to uplevel your skills, in which case you can go to communitystrategyacademy.com for the courses that Brian talked about. And if you are ready for, let's say, a deeper engagement or consulting, or really want to like get hands on with that program, that's brianoblinger.com.
That's right. And, Adam, since we joked about it before, I'm going to make the joke real now. If you
Let's
go
do
to
it.
the Strategy Academy and you use code Rotini, you will get 15% off. I'm going to make that. I'm going to make that a permanent code, just because we joked about it. Why not? Why not just ride it to completion, right? So go use your code, folks.
Amazing. And now we actually get to close out the show with that joke. So, listeners, if you want to learn more, we also have a podcast website at customer.education. You can find the show notes, other material, everything that we talked about. If you found value in this podcast, please share with your friends. Recently, people have been posting on LinkedIn their top takeaways from episodes, and Dave and I will go and respond to those and engage in conversation too. So, like, we really like hearing what your top takeaway was. Give us a tag, and help find the others. Thanks to Alan Coda for providing our theme music. Please leave us a 5-star review on the old Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That helps us a ton. And to our audience, thanks for joining us. Go out and educate, experiment, and find your people. And thanks, Brian, so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.